One veteran flight attendant thought she was merely putting an out-of-place passenger in her rightful spot. She publicly humiliated one young black mother in front of 200 people, bragging about her decades of seniority and untouchable pension. But she picked exactly the wrong mother on one completely wrong flight during one terribly wrong day. Shortly after, that flight attendant did not just lose her wings, she lost absolutely everything. Here is exactly how one long career vanished before boarding even finished. The air inside Chicago O'Hare International Airport's Terminal 5 was thick with the usual Friday evening tension. The fluorescent lights glared down on the exhausted faces of travelers waiting to board Atlantic Airways' direct red-eye to London Heathrow. Sitting quietly near the gate was Celine Vaughn. She possessed a quiet, steady confidence, though tonight it was heavily masked by maternal exhaustion. She wore a simple charcoal gray hoodie, premium but unbranded, black leggings, and comfortable slip-on sneakers. It was her go-to travel attire, designed for surviving a long transatlantic flight, not for walking a runway. Curled against her side was her 6-year-old son, Milo. His small fingers tightly clutched a worn-out stuffed aviator bear. This was Milo's first time flying over the ocean, and the mix of adrenaline and fatigue had finally quieted him down. What no one at the gate knew, least of all the flight crew preparing the Boeing 777-300ER, was that Celine Vaughn was not just a tired mother heading on a vacation. She was the newly appointed Vice President of Global Guest Experience and In-Flight Operations for Atlantic Airways. After a brutal corporate shakeup the previous month, the board of directors had headhunted Celine from a rival luxury hospitality brand to overhaul Atlantic's plummeting customer satisfaction ratings. Her appointment was not going to be publicly announced to the company until the following week. Tonight, she was traveling entirely incognito, using a ticket booked under her maiden name, intentionally flying on one of the airline's most notoriously poorly reviewed routes to see the problems for herself. She was about to get a front-row seat. Standing rigidly on the boarding podium, adjusting her silk neck scarf for the third time, was Vivian Langford. Vivian was a senior purser who had been flying with Atlantic Airways for decades. In Vivian's mind, she was aviation royalty. She had flown through the golden age of air travel, a time she frequently reminded younger flight attendants of, usually right before berating them for minor uniform infractions. Vivian was only a short time away from triggering her full executive tier pension, a lucrative retirement package the airline no longer offered to new hires. Because of her union seniority and impending retirement, Vivian believed she was utterly untouchable. "Ladies and gentlemen," the gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system, "we are now inviting our Diamond Medallion members and passengers ticketed in our first-class cabin to board through the priority lane." Celine gently nudged her son. "All right, buddy. Time to get on the big plane." Milo rubbed his eyes, grabbed his bear, and took his mother's hand. Celine hoisted her sleek black leather duffel bag onto her shoulder and walked toward the priority lane. There were only a few other passengers in the line. A man in a bespoke navy suit, an elderly couple dripping in designer labels, and then Celine and Milo. As Celine stepped onto the blue carpet of the priority lane, Vivian, who was assisting the gate agent with boarding scans, immediately narrowed her eyes. Her gaze raked over Celine's hoodie, the unbranded sneakers, and Milo's sleepy, slightly messy hair. The judgment in Vivian's posture was instantaneous and physical. She visibly stiffened, stepping slightly to the left to physically block the scanner. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet, heavily manufactured customer service tone that did not reach her eyes. "Group 4 boarding will not commence for a while. If you just step aside, we are only boarding our first class and Diamond members right now." Celine paused, offering a polite, practiced smile. She was used to this. "We are first class, seats 2A and 2B. Vivian let out a small, patronizing chuckle, glancing at the gate agent beside her as if sharing an inside joke. "Honey, I think you're mistaken. The first-class cabin on this aircraft is an exclusive suite product. Perhaps you mean a row farther back. It's very easy to misread the boarding passes on your phone. Let me see." Celine's polite smile did not falter, but her eyes cooled slightly. She held up her phone, the screen clearly displaying the digital boarding passes with the bright gold first-class banner across the top. Vivian squinted at the screen, her lips pursing into a tight, thin line. The gate agent, a young man named Reed, leaned over and scanned the phone. The machine let out a cheerful, high-pitched beep, and the screen flashed green. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Vaughn," Reed said politely, trying to diffuse the sudden tension. Vivian did not move out of the way immediately. She stared at the green light on the scanner, then back at Celine, her expression souring. "Right. Well, sometimes the system upgrades standby passengers at the last minute if there are empty seats. Down the jet bridge, take the first left." Celine did not bother correcting her. She did not mention that these tickets were full fare, paid for by the executive corporate account. Nor did she point out that an airline employee of decades should know that non-revenue standby passengers are never cleared before general boarding. She simply nodded, tightened her grip on Milo's hand, and walked down the ramp. "Mommy, why was that lady looking at us like we did something bad?" Milo whispered, his wide brown eyes looking up at her. "She's just having a long day, baby," Celine replied softly. But as she walked down the jet bridge, the executive side of her brain began taking mental notes. If a paying first-class customer was treated with such blatant profiling and hostility before even stepping foot on the aircraft, what was happening to the passengers in economy? She was about to find out just how far Vivian Langford was willing to go. The first-class cabin of the 777-300ER was a marvel of modern aviation design, at least when it was functioning properly. It featured 8 private suites, each boasting sliding doors, lie-flat beds, and massive entertainment screens. Celine and Milo were seated in the middle section, 2A and 2B, which allowed the divider between them to be lowered so they could share the space. Celine helped Milo take off his jacket, stowed her duffel bag in the overhead compartment, and settled into the plush leather seat. She let out a long breath, finally allowing herself to relax. The cabin was quiet, bathed in soft, ambient blue lighting. A few other passengers were already settling in. Across the aisle in seat 3A was a distinguished-looking older gentleman, later identified as Sterling Ashcroft, a prominent corporate attorney who was already deep into a thick novel. A short time passed. The rest of the first-class passengers trickled in. Vivian entered the cabin pushing a silver trolley adorned with crystal flutes and a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. This was the standard pre-departure beverage service. Celine watched as Vivian stopped at seat 1A, greeting the man in the bespoke suit by name. "Mr. Sterling, so wonderful to see you again. Champagne this evening?" She moved to the elderly couple, offering warm smiles and hot towels. Then Vivian bypassed row 2 entirely. She physically pulled the cart past Celine and Milo, not even glancing in their direction, and moved straight to Sterling in 3A. "Mr. Ashcroft, a glass of champagne before takeoff?" Celine watched this overt snub with a mixture of disbelief and clinical fascination. It was one thing to make a prejudiced assumption at the gate. It was entirely another to blatantly refuse basic service to ticketed passengers in the airline's most premium cabin. Milo tugged at Celine's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm thirsty. Can I have some water?" "Of course, sweetie," Celine said. She reached up and pressed the flight attendant call button. A soft chime echoed in the cabin, and the blue light above her seat illuminated. Vivian, who was just finishing pouring a glass for Sterling, paused. She looked at the illuminated light above Celine's seat, sighed audibly, and slowly rolled the cart backward. "Yes?" Vivian asked. Not "how can I help you?" Not Ms. Vaughn. Just a flat, irritated yes. "Hi," Celine said, keeping her voice even and professional. "My son is quite thirsty. Could we please get a glass of water for him? And perhaps just a sparkling water for myself?" Vivian rested her hands on her hips, completely abandoning the silver service card. "Ma'am, the pre-departure service is complimentary champagne for our premium guests. Bottled water will be distributed once we reach cruising altitude. If he needed water, you should have bought some in the terminal." Celine blinked. The blatant lie was almost laughable. The first-class galleys were stocked with dozens of bottles of Evian, specifically for pre-departure hydration. "I'm fully aware of the galley inventory," Celine said quietly, deciding to test the waters slightly. "I know there is water available. He's 6 years old and we've been traveling all day. A simple glass of water shouldn't be an issue." Vivian's posture grew aggressively rigid. The fake customer service veneer completely melted away, revealing a deeply ingrained, bitter entitlement. "I don't know how things work on whatever budget airlines you're used to flying," Vivian said, her voice rising in volume, intentionally carrying across the quiet cabin. "But on Atlantic Airways, we have procedures, and frankly, I'm still trying to figure out how you got past the gate agent with those tickets." The cabin fell dead silent. The rustling of newspapers stopped. Sterling Ashcroft slowly lowered his book, his eyes darting to the unfolding scene. Celine felt a flush of heat rise in her chest, the protective instinct of a mother warring with the analytical coldness of a corporate executive. "Excuse me?" Celine asked, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "You heard me," Vivian snapped, fully leaning into her prejudice now that she had an audience. "I've been flying this route for years. I know our premium clientele. People don't just wander into a multi-thousand-dollar suite in a sweatshirt. Unless there's been a massive ticketing error or someone is playing games with buddy passes. I need to see your boarding passes again. The physical paper ones." "I showed you the digital passes at the gate," Celine replied. "They scanned green. We are in our assigned seats." "Digital passes can be screenshotted and manipulated," Vivian fired back, crossing her arms. "I am the senior purser on this aircraft, and I am responsible for the security and integrity of this cabin. If you cannot produce valid physical proof of your purchase, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things and move to the back of the aircraft until we can sort this out with the gate agent." Milo shrank back against the leather seat, his bottom lip trembling. "Mommy, did we do something wrong? Are we in trouble?" "No, Milo, we didn't do anything wrong," Celine said, placing a reassuring hand on her son's knee. She looked up at Vivian, her eyes hard as diamonds. "I am not moving anywhere. I am not showing you my phone again, and you are actively violating at least 3 distinct company policies regarding guest relations and cabin integrity." Vivian let out a loud, scoffing laugh. It was an ugly sound that bounced off the curved ceiling of the cabin. "Company policies? You think you know company policies? Listen to me very carefully, little girl. I have been wearing these wings for decades. I am retiring soon with a full executive pension. I am the policy on this airplane." "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from across the aisle. Sterling Ashcroft, the attorney in seat 3A, had unbuckled his seatbelt and was leaning forward, frowning deeply at Vivian. "The lady asked for water for her child. Your behavior is completely out of line, flight attendant." Vivian turned her glare on Sterling. "Sir, with all due respect, please mind your own business. This is a security matter regarding fraudulent boarding documents." "Fraudulent?" Celine repeated. The sheer audacity of the accusation finally pushed her past the point of passive observation. "You are accusing me of fraud because of the clothes I am wearing and the color of my skin. That is exactly what is happening here, Vivian." Celine had looked at the gold name tag pinned to Vivian's lapel. Using her first name seemed to act like a spark to gasoline. "How dare you accuse me of that?" Vivian hissed, her face flushing a deep mottled red. "I am doing my job, and since you want to be combative and refuse a lawful crew member instruction, you are no longer just a ticketing error. You are a security threat." The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin had turned incredibly toxic. What should have been a relaxing, luxurious start to a transatlantic journey had morphed into a theater of humiliation. Celine Vaughn, the undercover vice president of the airline, sat perfectly still as the senior flight attendant loomed over her. "I'm going to give you one final warning," Vivian said, her voice shaking with righteous indignation. She pointed a manicured finger toward the economy cabin. "You and your child will pick up your bags and you will walk to the rear galley. You will wait there while I call the captain to determine if we are going to allow you to remain on this flight at all." "I will not," Selena said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a commanding, absolute authority that momentarily threw Vivian off balance. It was the voice of a woman used to addressing boardrooms full of billionaires, not a woman intimidated by an abusive employee. "Then you leave me no choice," Vivian sneered. She reached for the heavy red intercom phone mounted on the bulkhead wall behind row 1. She punched in a 2-digit code, bringing the phone to her ear. "Captain Voss," Vivian said, projecting her voice so the entire cabin could hear. "This is Vivian, your senior purser. I have a situation in the forward cabin. I have a passenger in seat 2A who is refusing to produce valid ticketing, refusing crew instructions, and acting in a hostile and combative manner. Yes, she has a child with her, but she is completely uncooperative. I need you to authorize airport security to come on board and remove her." Celine did not panic. She did not yell. She did not beg. Instead, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her own sleek smartphone, and unlocked it. She bypassed her personal contacts and opened a secure encrypted corporate directory app, an app only accessible to C-suite executives at Atlantic Airways. Milo was quietly crying now, burying his face in his stuffed bear. Celine wrapped one arm around him, pulling him tight against her side, kissing the top of his head. "It's okay, Milo. I promise you it's going to be okay. The plane isn't leaving without us." Across the aisle, Sterling Ashcroft was furiously typing on his tablet, muttering under his breath about filing a massive lawsuit on Celine's behalf. Several other passengers were shaking their heads in disgust, though none wanted to risk being thrown off the flight themselves by actively interjecting. Vivian hung up the bulkhead phone and turned back to Celine with a triumphant, malicious smirk. "The captain has authorized the removal. Port Authority police have been called to the jet bridge. You brought this on yourself, honey. You wanted to play rich, and now you're going to be escorted out of the airport in handcuffs." "You are making a catastrophic mistake," Celine said quietly, her thumb hovering over a specific contact on her screen. "I am giving you one final opportunity, Vivian. Walk away, go to the galley, fetch the water I asked for, and we can handle this quietly after we land in London." "I don't serve your kind of people in this cabin." Vivian leaned in and whispered, her voice dropping so low that only Celine could hear the venomous, undisguised bigotry in her words. "And I certainly don't take orders from you. My pension is locked in. I am untouchable. You are nothing." That was it. The absolute final straw. Celine pressed the call button on her phone. She did not call the police. She did not call the gate agent. She called Callum Drake, the chief executive officer of Atlantic Airways. The phone rang twice before being picked up. "Celine," the CEO's voice came through the earpiece, slightly confused. "Tell me you aren't working." "Callum," Celine said, her tone completely devoid of emotion. "I am currently sitting in seat 2A on this flight. We haven't pushed back yet." "Ah, the incognito run. How's the flagship product looking?" Callum asked cheerfully. "The physical product is fine," Celine replied, keeping her eyes locked dead onto Vivian's. "The service, however, requires immediate intervention. Your senior purser, a woman named Vivian Langford, has just refused me service, demanded physical proof of my ticket, because she doesn't believe I belong in first class, whispered a racial remark to me, and has just called Port Authority to have me and my 6-year-old son dragged off the aircraft for being combative." There was a profound, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The cheerful demeanor of the CEO vanished instantly. When Callum spoke again, his voice was like ice. "She did what?" "She has informed me she is untouchable because of her impending executive pension," Celine continued calmly. "Port Authority is apparently on the jet bridge. I need you to call Captain Harlan Voss in the cockpit of this aircraft immediately. Tell him to hold his position and tell him exactly who is sitting in seat 2A. Vivian, who had been listening to this one-sided conversation, let out a loud theatrical sigh. "Oh, please. Fake calling customer service isn't going to save you. The police are already here." Indeed, heavy footsteps were echoing down the jet bridge. 2 large Port Authority police officers stepped through the forward boarding door, their radios crackling. The gate agent, Reed, trailed nervously behind them. "Officers, right here," Vivian called out, waving them toward row 2. She pointed dramatically at Celine. "This woman is trespassing in the premium cabin, refusing to show a ticket, and acting aggressively. She needs to be removed immediately." The lead officer, a stern-looking man named Officer Brennan, approached Celine. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and step off the aircraft." "Officer," Sterling Ashcroft interjected from 3A, standing up. "I am a licensed attorney. This flight attendant is completely fabricating the situation. This mother has done absolutely nothing wrong." "Sir, sit down," the officer commanded before turning back to Celine. "Ma'am, let's go. Now. Don't make me do this the hard way in front of your kid." Celine did not move. She held her phone up. "I just got off the phone with the CEO of this airline. I highly recommend you wait approximately 30 seconds before you try to put a hand on me." Vivian threw her head back and laughed. "The CEO? Oh, that's rich. Officers, please. She's delusional." Suddenly, the heavy reinforced door of the cockpit swung open with a loud clack. Captain Harlan Voss, a longtime veteran pilot, burst out of the flight deck. He looked completely pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of sheer panic and absolute fury. He held the cockpit radio handset in one hand, trailing the cord behind him. "Hold it!" Captain Voss bellowed, his voice echoing through the cabin like a thunderclap. The Port Authority officers froze. Vivian blinked, turning toward the captain with a confused smile. "Captain, it's fine. The officers are handling the disruption." "Shut your mouth, Vivian," Voss roared, entirely abandoning his usual calm pilot demeanor. He marched down the aisle, practically shoving past the officers, and stopped dead in front of row 2. He looked at Celine. He looked at Milo. Then he looked at the open corporate directory on Celine's phone, which displayed her photo, her name, and her title. Celine Vaughn, Vice President, Global Guest Experience and In-Flight Operations. Captain Voss swallowed hard. He slowly turned his head to look at Vivian, who was suddenly looking very unsure of herself. "Vivian," the captain said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" Captain Harlan Voss stood trembling in the aisle of the first-class cabin, his face a mask of absolute horror. He was a seasoned aviator, a man who had successfully landed a Boeing 777 with a failed engine in a blizzard without breaking a sweat. But right now, staring at the woman in seat 2A and the frightened little boy clutching her arm, he looked as though the aircraft were plummeting toward the earth with no parachutes on board. Vivian, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of the situation, offered the captain a dismissive, patronizing smile. "Captain Voss, honestly, there was no need for you to leave the flight deck. The Port Authority officers have it perfectly under control. This passenger is being entirely uncooperative and needs to be escorted back to the terminal. We're already running behind schedule." "Stand down," Captain Voss barked, not at Celine, but at the two large Port Authority officers. Officer Brennan, the lead policeman, frowned and lowered his hand from his utility belt. "Captain, the purser called us in on a Code 3. Combative passenger refusing to disembark." "There is no Code 3, Voss said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, gravelly register. He finally tore his eyes away from Celine and locked them onto his senior flight attendant. "Vivian, stay away from that woman right now." Vivian's patronizing smile faltered, replaced by a deep furrow of confusion. "Harlan, what are you talking about? She's an unticketed standby who is refusing—"
"She is Celine Vaughn!"
the captain shouted, the sheer volume of his voice making several passengers in the cabin physically jump. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his professional composure, though his hands were visibly shaking. He gestured sharply toward Celine. "This woman is Celine Vaughn. She is the newly appointed Vice President of Global Guest Experience and In-Flight Operations for Atlantic Airways. She is the head of your department, Vivian. She is your ultimate boss, and you just called the police on her." A deafening, absolute silence fell over the first-class cabin. The low hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit suddenly seemed impossibly loud. Vivian Langford froze. All the color drained from her face, leaving her deeply tanned skin a sickly ashen gray. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no sound came out. She stared at Celine's charcoal gray hoodie, the unbranded sneakers, and then up to the cold, analytical eyes of the woman sitting in seat 2A. That's impossible, Vivienne finally stammered, her voice stripped of all its previous bravado, reduced to a hollow whisper. The memo, the new VP isn't supposed to be announced until next week, and she wouldn't be flying dressed like a mother traveling with her 6-year-old son, Celine interrupted. She stood up slowly, her posture radiating an effortless, terrifying authority. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Or dressed like someone you deemed unworthy of sitting in a premium cabin, based on nothing but your own deeply ingrained prejudice. Officer Brennan, realizing with sudden clarity that he and his partner had just been weaponized in a blatant act of racial profiling against a corporate executive, let out a heavy sigh of disgust. He turned a furious glare on Vivienne. "Ma'am, did you lie to dispatch? Did you falsely report a security threat to the Port Authority Police Department?" No, I was just following protocol." Vivienne backpedaled frantically, her eyes darting between the police, the captain, and Celine. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "She wouldn't show me her physical boarding pass. It's a security measure." "You scanned my digital boarding pass at the gate," Celine stated calmly, stepping into the aisle to face Vivienne directly. "You watched the gate agent clear it. You then intentionally bypassed my seat during the pre-departure service. When I politely requested a glass of water for my child, you lied about the galley inventory. You then demanded physical documentation that you knew I didn't possess. And when I refused to be intimidated, you whispered a racial slur to me, walked to that bulkhead phone, and attempted to have me dragged off this aircraft by armed police officers." "I never used a slur," Vivienne shrieked, panic entirely taking over. "You're making that up. You can't prove anything." "Actually, she can." A voice rang out from across the aisle. Sterling Ashcroft, the distinguished corporate attorney in seat 3A, stood up. He adjusted his suit jacket and fixed Vivienne with a stare so icy it could have frozen jet fuel. "I have extraordinary hearing, Ms. Langford. I heard exactly what you whispered to this young woman. Furthermore, I have been taking meticulous time-stamped notes on my tablet since you first approached her. I am a senior partner at a major firm in Manhattan. I will personally swear an affidavit to the FAA, to the Port Authority, and to Atlantic Airways' legal department, confirming every single word Ms. Vaughn just said. You are a disgrace to that uniform." Vivienne took a physical step back, bumping hard into the silver champagne trolley. The crystal flutes rattled dangerously. Her chest heaved as she looked around the cabin, desperately searching for an ally. There were none. The other passengers were either glaring at her with outright contempt or recording the fallout on their smartphones. "Captain," Celine said, turning to Harlan Voss. Her tone was entirely professional, stripping away the trauma of the last stretch of time and replacing it with the cold efficiency of a C-suite executive. "I apologize for the delay to your flight schedule. However, under zero circumstances will this aircraft push back from the gate with this woman acting as senior purser. Please instruct the gate agent to pull a reserve flight attendant from the terminal. We will take the delay." Captain Voss nodded emphatically. "Yes, ma'am. Immediately." He turned to the young gate agent Reed, who was cowering near the cockpit door. "Reed, call crew scheduling. Get a reserve up here now." "Reed, wait," Celine said, her eyes locking back onto Vivienne. "Before you do that, there is one more piece of business we need to handle. Vivienne seems to believe that her actions tonight carry no consequences." The fluorescent lights of the jet bridge spilled into the dimly lit cabin, casting long, harsh shadows. Vivienne, completely cornered and rapidly losing her grip on her decades-long superiority complex, crossed her arms defensively. Her hands were shaking so violently that her gold wings vibrated against her lapel. "You can't fire me," Vivienne spat, though the words lacked any real conviction. It was the desperate, flailing defense of a drowning woman. "I am union protected. You can write me up. You can suspend me. But you cannot terminate me on the spot. I have decades of seniority, I have a union representative, and my executive pension is locked in soon. You can't touch it." Celine looked at Vivian not with anger, but with a profound, almost clinical pity. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her smartphone, and tapped the screen. "While we were waiting for the captain to open the cockpit door," Celine said, her voice echoing clearly in the quiet cabin, "I sent an urgent text to the Executive Vice President of Human Resources for Atlantic Airways. I also CC'd the head of the Flight Attendants Union." Vivian's eyes widened. The mention of the union head made the blood rush from her ears. "I am intimately familiar with the union collective bargaining agreement, Vivian," Celine continued, taking a slow step forward. "Specifically the section on gross misconduct and civil rights violations. The union protects its members against unfair scheduling, wage disputes, and managerial overreach. Do you know what the union does not protect you from?" Vivian swallowed hard, completely silent. "The union does not protect you from committing a federal civil rights violation on a commercial aircraft," Celine said, her words landing like hammer blows. "By explicitly denying a ticketed passenger service based on racial profiling and subsequently attempting to use law enforcement to unlawfully remove that passenger, you have triggered a zero-tolerance gross misconduct clause." Celine held up her phone. The screen displayed a freshly received email marked with a bright red high-priority flag. "I have just received authorization from both HR and your union representative," Celine stated. "Vivian Langford, your employment with Atlantic Airways is terminated effective immediately. You are stripped of your wings, your flight privileges, and your security clearance." "No, please," Vivian gasped, the realization finally breaking through her wall of denial. Tears began to well in her eyes, ruining her perfectly applied mascara. "My pension, please. I've given my entire life to this company. I need that pension." "Let's talk about that pension," Celine said smoothly, though there was no warmth in her eyes. "You were banking on the Tier 1 executive retirement package, a package that pays out a substantial annual sum, plus full medical, a package that, according to the bylaws, is immediately and irrevocably forfeited if an employee is terminated for gross misconduct involving a federal discrimination violation." Vivian let out a choked, devastated sob. Her knees visibly buckled, and she had to grip the edge of the champagne trolley to keep from collapsing onto the carpet. In the span of a short confrontation, her arrogant assumption had cost her a multi-million-dollar retirement safety net. She would still receive her basic retirement contributions, but the golden parachute she had so proudly flaunted to her younger colleagues was gone, incinerated by her own hubris. "You brought this entirely on yourself," Celine said softly. She turned to the Port Authority officers who were watching the corporate execution with a mix of awe and grim satisfaction. "Officers, this woman is no longer an employee of Atlantic Airways, and she does not have a ticket for this flight. Please escort her off the aircraft and out of the secure terminal area." Officer Brennan stepped forward, his expression stern. He pointed toward the jet bridge. "All right, Ms. Langford. Gather your personal belongings. We're leaving. Now." Vivian did not argue. She could not. The fight had completely drained out of her, leaving nothing but a hollow shell of ruined entitlement. She numbly reached into the forward closet, pulling out her regulation trench coat and her rolling suitcase. She did not look at Celine. She did not look at the captain. She certainly did not look at Sterling Ashcroft or the other first-class passengers who were watching her disgraced exit. With her head bowed, Vivian Langford, formerly the most senior purser at Atlantic Airways, was marched off the Boeing 777 by the exact same police officers she had maliciously summoned to remove a young black mother. As Vivian disappeared down the jet bridge, a sudden spontaneous round of applause broke out in the first-class cabin. Sterling Ashcroft clapped loudly, nodding his approval at Celine. Celine did not smile. She did not revel in the destruction of a woman's career. She simply took a deep, centering breath and turned back to her seat. Captain Voss approached her, looking deeply apologetic. "Ms. Vaughn, I cannot express how sorry I am for what you and your son just experienced. I had no idea." "Harlan," Celine interrupted gently, placing a hand on the captain's forearm. "You responded exactly as you should have. You prioritized the safety of the cabin. You intervened when you saw a situation escalating, and you de-escalated it without violence. You are an exemplary captain. Now please, let's get this plane to London." "Right away, ma'am," Voss said, offering a crisp, respectful nod before retreating to the flight deck. Celine slid back into seat 2A. The adrenaline was finally beginning to wear off, replaced by the deep, familiar ache of exhaustion. She looked down at Milo. Her 6-year-old son was staring at her with wide, reverent eyes, his stuffed bear temporarily forgotten in his lap. "Mommy," Milo whispered, "are you the boss of the airplane?" Celine finally allowed a genuine, warm smile to cross her face. She reached out and smoothed his messy hair. "Something like that, sweetie. Something like that." Just then, a young, slightly out-of-breath flight attendant named Paige came rushing into the cabin from the rear galley. She was a junior crew member clearly terrified by the sudden commotion and the abrupt firing of her senior purser. She approached row 2 with extreme caution, holding a silver tray with trembling hands. "Excuse me, Ms. Vaughn," Paige said, looking terrified she might make a wrong move. I brought the water you asked for, and a sparkling water for you. I'm so sorry for the wait." Celine's expression immediately softened. She took the tray, offering the young woman a kind, reassuring smile. "Thank you, Paige. You did wonderfully. We're going to have a great flight." Paige let out a massive sigh of relief, her shoulders dropping. "Thank you, ma'am." As Milo eagerly took a sip of his water, finally settling back into the plush leather seat for the long flight ahead, Celine pulled out her laptop. The plane had not even pushed back from the gate yet, and she already had her first major executive initiative drafted in her head. The next day, Atlantic Airways was going to experience a massive, unprecedented overhaul of its diversity and inclusion training, and the customer service protocol was going to be rewritten from the ground up. The untouchable had just been touched, and Celine Vaughn was just getting started. The remaining hours of the flight to London Heathrow were nothing short of exemplary. With Vivian permanently removed from the aircraft, the oppressive tension in the first-class cabin evaporated. Paige, the junior flight attendant pulled from reserve, performed her duties with a genuine, eager warmth that perfectly embodied the hospitality standards Celine Vaughn was hired to enforce. By the time the Boeing 767 touched down on the damp British tarmac, Celine had completely drafted the framework for Atlantic Airways' new global inclusivity and de-escalation training program. Celine and Milo checked into their suite at the Savoy in London. While Milo slept off the jet lag, Celine spent the entire weekend locked in a corporate war room of her own making. She cross-referenced union bylaws, reviewed years of customer complaint logs on the JFK Heathrow route, and prepared her presentation for the executive board meeting the following week. But while Celine was preparing to change the airline from the inside, the outside world was about to force Atlantic Airways' hand. It started late in the weekend. A passenger sitting nearby, a young tech entrepreneur named Corinne Hale, had been silently recording the entire altercation on her phone, angling the camera perfectly between the seats. Corinne had not intervened during the shouting match, but she knew exactly how to wield digital justice. She uploaded the raw, edited video to 3 different social media platforms simultaneously. The caption read, "Racist flight attendant tries to kick a black mom off a first-class flight. Wait until the captain reveals who the mom really is. Instant karma." The internet did what the internet does best. It exploded. Within a short time, the video had amassed tens of millions of views. It became the #1 trending topic worldwide. Major news outlets, aviation blogs, and morning talk shows were broadcasting the grainy footage of Vivian Langford sneering, "I don't serve your kind of people in this cabin." The world watched in collective outrage as Vivian bragged about her untouchable pension, followed immediately by the deeply satisfying cinematic moment, Captain Voss bursting through the cockpit door to deliver the ultimate reality check. When Celine walked into Atlantic Airways' European headquarters in central London the following morning, the building was in a state of absolute chaotic panic. She was immediately ushered into the glass-walled executive boardroom. On the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall, a high-stakes emergency video call was already underway, connecting the London office with the C-suite executives back in New York. Preston Hale, the chairman of the board, looked as though he was on the verge of a myocardial infarction. His face was flushed red and he was shouting into his microphone. "Our stock is down significantly in pre-market trading. The PR department's phones have been ringing off the hook. We are being painted as a systemic breeding ground for bigotry. We need a crisis management firm right now." "Preston, breathe," the chief executive officer replied from his New York office, rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted. "We don't need a crisis firm. We just need to let Celine speak." Every eye in the London boardroom and every camera on the call snapped toward Celine Vaughn. She stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking impeccably sharp in a tailored navy blazer. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she had already won. "Good morning, gentlemen," Celine said, her voice projecting calm authority. She connected her tablet to the boardroom monitor, instantly replacing the chaotic stock tickers with a clean, heavily detailed slide deck. "Let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, the video is a public relations nightmare. Yes, Vivian Langford's behavior was a catastrophic failure of our brand standards. But if we hire a crisis management firm to spin this, we will look defensive, guilty, and corporate." "Then what do you suggest we do, Celine?" Preston Hale asked, his voice shaking. "The public wants blood. The public wants accountability," Celine corrected sharply. "And fortunately, we have already provided it. Vivian was not suspended pending an investigation. She was not placed on paid administrative leave. She was terminated on the spot, stripped of her pension, and escorted off the aircraft by police before the flight ever left the gate. We didn't hide it. We handled it." She tapped her tablet, and a drafted press release appeared on the screen. "At the start of the business day, Eastern Standard Time, we are releasing this statement across all platforms," Celine instructed. "We are going to publicly confirm the events of the video. We will state unequivocally that Atlantic Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. We will publicly thank Captain Voss and the junior crew for their professionalism. And then we are going to announce the Golden Rule Initiative, a massive top-down retraining of our entire customer-facing workforce, which I will be personally overseeing." Elise Lang, the vice president of public relations, leaned forward, her eyes widening as she read the draft. "Celine, this is incredibly transparent. You're putting yourself front and center. You're acknowledging the rot." "Because sunlight is the best disinfectant, Elise," Celine said, her tone absolute. "We are not going to apologize and hope this goes away. We are going to own it, and we are going to use it to set a new standard for the entire aviation industry. By tomorrow morning, the narrative won't be about a racist flight attendant. The narrative will be about the airline that fired her on the spot and is cleaning house." The boardroom was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, Preston Hale nodded. "Do it. Send the release. You have full control, Celine." While Celine Vaughn was masterfully steering a multi-billion-dollar corporation through the storm, Vivian Langford was drowning in the wreckage of her own life. Vivian sat in the living room of her expensive, heavily mortgaged Long Island home, clutching a cold cup of coffee. The television was muted, but it did not matter. Every channel she turned to featured her own face. Her phone had not stopped buzzing. Neighbors were glaring at her through the windows. Reporters were parked at the end of her driveway, holding boom microphones and cameras. She was a global pariah, but Vivian's arrogance was a deeply ingrained disease. Instead of feeling remorse, she felt only a bitter, burning victimization. She convinced herself that she had been set up, that Celine Vaughn had entrapped her to make a corporate statement. Desperate and furious, Vivian managed to sneak out her back door, climb over a neighbor's fence, and take a taxi to a dingy legal office in Queens. She was there to meet Tristan Hale, a predatory plaintiff's attorney known for taking high-profile, winnable cases just to siphon media attention. Tristan sat behind his cluttered desk, looking at Vivian with calculating, opportunistic eyes. "So, Vivian, you're telling me you were targeted. You want to sue Atlantic Airways for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. You want your executive pension reinstated. I want millions, Vivian snapped, slamming her hand on the desk. They destroyed my life over a misunderstanding. I have decades of clean employee reviews. You can't just fire someone with union seniority without a formal hearing. It's in the contract. Tristan smiled a greasy, thin smile. I love the fire, Vivian. I'll draft the demand letter today. We'll hit them with an injunction soon. They'll settle quietly, just to make us go away. Corporations always fold when you threaten a protracted discovery process. Tristan was wrong. Monumentally, historically wrong. Shortly after Tristan sent the threatening demand letter to Atlantic Airways' legal department, the counterstrike arrived. But it did not come from a faceless corporate lawyer. It came via a hand-delivered sealed dossier from the prestigious Manhattan law firm of Sterling Ashcroft's Partnership. Vivian was sitting in Tristan's office when he opened the heavy manila envelope. As Tristan read the contents, the color violently drained from his face. "What is it?" Vivian demanded, crossing her arms. "How much are they offering to settle?" Tristan did not answer immediately. He slowly lowered the documents, looking at Vivian not as a client, but as a massive radioactive liability. "They aren't offering a settlement, Vivian," Tristan said, his voice completely devoid of its earlier bravado. "This is a counter-notice of intent to sue. Atlantic Airways is preparing to file a civil suit against you for breach of contract, brand defamation, and damages exceeding tens of millions." They can't do that!" Vivian shrieked. "They can, and they are," Tristan replied, flipping to the second page. "And they have the ammunition. They've attached a sworn, time-stamped affidavit from a passenger who witnessed the entire event. A man named Sterling Ashcroft. Do you know who Sterling Ashcroft is, Vivian?" Vivian swallowed hard. He was the man in seat 3A. An attorney, I think." "He's not just an attorney," Tristan hissed, slamming the paper down. "He is a senior partner at this exact firm. He is one of the most ruthless corporate litigators in the state of New York. He has sworn, under penalty of perjury, that he heard you use a racial slur, that you explicitly denied service based on profiling, and that you lied to law enforcement to have a passenger removed. He is offering to represent Atlantic Airways pro bono, just to see you ruined." Vivian's breath hitched. The walls of the tiny office felt like they were closing in. "But my union rep has to step in. They have to defend me against this." Tristan pulled out the final piece of paper from the envelope. It was a formal press release from the Flight Attendants Union. "The union stands firmly against any form of discrimination or bigotry," Tristan read aloud, his eyes scanning the damning text. "In light of the incontrovertible video evidence and sworn witness testimony regarding the events of this flight, the union has officially revoked Ms. Langford's membership standing. We will not provide legal counsel, nor will we contest her termination or the forfeiture of her executive pension. Her actions do not represent the thousands of hard-working aviation professionals in our ranks." Tristan tossed the papers across the desk. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Your union dropped you. The airline is ready to bankrupt you. You have absolutely no legal standing, Vivian. The gross misconduct clause is ironclad." "So what do we do?" Vivian whispered, tears of sheer panic finally spilling over her eyelashes. "What's our next move?" "There is no we," Tristan said coldly, standing up and walking to his office door, pulling it open. "I'm dropping you as a client. If you try to pursue this, Sterling Ashcroft will drag you through multi-year litigation that will cost you every cent you have ever made. My advice, sell your house, downsize, disappear, because your career in aviation, and your life as you knew it, is completely over." Vivian Langford stumbled out of the law office and onto the noisy Queens sidewalk. The cold wind whipped her hair across her face. For decades she had looked down on people, wielding her slight fraction of power like a weapon, protected by a system she thought would never fail her. Now, stripped of her uniform, her pension, and her pride, she realized the devastating truth. She was not aviation royalty. She was just an unemployed, disgraced woman facing the total collapse of her own making. Months later, the atmosphere at Atlantic Airways was unrecognizable. Under Celine Vaughn's relentless visionary leadership, the Golden Rule Initiative had fundamentally transformed the company culture. Customer satisfaction ratings on the JFK Heathrow route had skyrocketed by an unprecedented margin. The viral video that could have destroyed the airline had instead become the ultimate case study in corporate accountability. Celine had completely restructured the reporting system, ensuring that frontline employees were empowered, but also held to the absolute highest standard of inclusive hospitality. It was a crisp evening, and Celine was once again walking through the terminal at JFK. This time, she was not incognito. She was flanked by two airport executives, conducting a routine walkthrough of the priority lounges. As she approached the gate, she paused. Standing at the podium was Reed, the young gate agent who had been terrified during the incident months earlier. He was now sporting a shiny new gold badge, Leadgate Concierge, a promotion Celine had personally signed off on after reviewing his flawless performance metrics. Reed saw Celine approaching and immediately stood up straighter, a massive, genuine smile breaking across his face. "Good evening, Ms. Vaughn. Great to see you." "Good evening, Reed." Celine smiled warmly. "How is the boarding process for the flight tonight?" "Perfect, ma'am. On time, and the first-class cabin is fully checked in. Paige is the senior purser tonight. She's got everything completely under control." Celine nodded, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over her. The system was finally working the way it was always supposed to. True luxury was not about who you excluded. It was about how flawlessly you welcomed everyone who walked through the door. As Celine turned to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her husband featuring a photo of Milo holding up a drawing he had made at school. It was a picture of an airplane colored slightly outside the lines with the words "Mommy's plane" written in waxy blue crayon at the top. Celine smiled, slipped her phone back into her pocket, and walked confidently out of the terminal. The skies were finally clear. If this story made your blood boil, and then cheer for absolute undeniable justice, hit that like button right now. We all know someone who lets a little bit of power go to their head, but seeing a workplace bully face instant karma never gets old. What would you have done if you were in Celine's shoes on that airplane? Let us know down in the comments. We read every single one. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories of revenge, corporate drama, and sweet justice. See you next time.